right. Well, hello, welcome. This is DevOps CI's APIs on my Security Gone Agile. I'm Matt Tesaro. I will be doing this presentation. There's a bunch of stuff here. I have very information-dense slides, mostly so that if you want to look at this later, you'll have the stuff. I mostly just use it to remember what I wanted to talk about. And as I'm going along, if you have a question, just raise your hand, shout it out, throw coins a pound or greater. I don't want to get hit by something that's in the P range. That's no good. So let's get started. So who am I? I'm Matt Tesaro. I've been at Rackspace since 2011, October. I'm in the Rackspace Product Security Group, which is a group that lives in our product group, go figure, which is where we develop the various OpenStack and other products that end up being sold to customers, right? And at Rackspace with the Product Security Group, we're kind of I don't know, we're unique from my other positions where I actually report up through the QE or quality engineering chain. So where I actually live, our Product Security Group lives underneath the VP of Quality Engineering. So we kind of work hand in hand with the QE folks. That's my work side of me. The OWASP side of me, I was a board member, I think from 2009 till 2011, I think, or something like that. And I've been doing the OWASP Live CD since 2008, which is now WTE, because I don't really do ISOs anymore. And I started an OpenStack security project as well. So DevOps, CIs, APIs, oh my. So just so that we have sort of a common idea of what DevOps is, right? It's the idea that we're going to combine sort of, or break the older mold of developers do code, they chuck it over a wall, and then ops has to somehow deploy this thing. And you have this adversarial relationship between the two, right? Let's all get along, let's all drink the Kool-Aid and be happy. So it's a collaboration, agile experience, and the idea is really to sort of have each group sort of feel the pain of the other group, right? So that if the dev guys are producing code that's undeployable, they feel some of that pain. And if the operations guys are making deployments really painful for the dev guys, they share that pain. So hopefully, in the end, we all get better, hopefully. And there's tons of automation and release coordination. That's a big part in my mind of DevOps. Okay, just so we have all the terms laid out. CI, continuous integration, CD, continuous deployment, but I've also seen CD be continuous delivery. Those are both kind of the same thing, depending on how pedantic you want to be. TDD, test-driven development, and APIs and application program interface, right? Just so that everybody has the same terms. Quick and easy stuff. So the problem. So the cycle time for software is getting really, really fast. Rackspace has a range of products in terms of speed and maturity. The most aggressive of which is deploying last year on average 72 times per week, which is nutty. Just flat bonkers. And depending on the product group, some of them already have continuous delivery, some of them don't, where it's a spectrum, right? Based on the product team and how sort of mature they are. And then for a security person who used to work in a much more traditional waterfall shop in a past life, the normal, like, this is my testing week doesn't exist when you're deploying 72 times a week. It's like, okay, let me out my window's over. Right? So it's just not really functional. So my first reaction was to say, no, I need a week. We have to slow down. And that just won't happen, right? Businesses don't want to slow down. If nothing else, there's this huge first-to-market, first-mover advantage, right? You may not have the best thing, but if you get it out first, you kind of grab market share and it's off to the races. So trying to talk to the business about slowing down is just, it's not going to work, right? That's not tenable as a security person, so that's just not a viable option. Oh, I've already said this, traditional software, little time to test, right? And then you add in DevOps, continuous delivery, and you're even having more in CI/CD, and your Windows are getting shrunk, right? All of this is sort of working against you. And then even better, at Rackspace, we have a lot of Ruby and Python. Those are languages that I can't automatically use a traditional static analyzer to look at, right? Because static analyzers have no idea what to do with Ruby and Python. So once again, a place where I could maybe inject some automation, I can't. So it gets even worse. And then RESTful APIs, that's the other one. We have lots and lots and lots of RESTful APIs. We don't produce waddles for those APIs. This is an OpenStackism. They don't like waddles for whatever reason. So I don't even have a way to automatically talk to APIs. If I want to test a RESTful API, I have to read the docs, right? and test it. There's not like in the SOAP world where you could pull a WSDL and maybe at least automatically make the default method calls. I can't do that now. So there's all these things sort of working against you, and you kind of feel like going down to the pub and just drinking and forgetting about it, right? And if you're trying to do manual testing, which it just takes time, that's even harder. So what do? Like automate everything. Automate the software testing, automate the infrastructure, and automate automated security testing. I thought I worded that differently, but oh well, it's early. So I'm gonna talk through those three key areas. First from a design and principle point of view, and then I'm gonna talk about what we've done to try to implement those things at Rackspace. So first things first, I would challenge people who haven't been a developer. My first job out of college was at a international telecom whose operations were almost all in Europe, but the data center was in Texas, which was very strange to me. But when I messed up, it was kind of nice because we had a lot of Belgian customers. And so I would get woken up at 3 in the morning with a really angry Belgian yelling at me in my bed. And it's like, look, okay, let me wake up at least. I know you're just getting up now, but I'm actually really, really asleep, and let me go to the office and we'll get it fixed. But so I would challenge people who are in the security, application security field to think more like a developer. Like, think about breaking right? Because if you're developing an app these days, you don't do like the big waterfall thing where I have all my requirements and I go, you break it into pieces. So start thinking about how you can break the testing you do into little and preferably automatable pieces. The other thing we do at Rackspace tons is threat modeling. And threat modeling is really nice because I'm time constrained, right? And now I have an overview of the system, and if nothing else, I can see the parts that look a little wonky or interesting, and maybe if I'm time constrained, I only look at the wonky or interesting parts, right? It's just very pragmatic, but it has served us very well. And then think about the difference of like time of tests, right? Long and short running tests. Those short running tests, you can almost automate those and cron job those and have them just running weekly against infrastructure, right? And then when you do actually do a formal review of a particular, in our case, product, you can look at the results of those cron jobs and have a good chunk of what would be manual testing done for you already, right? And at worst, it's maybe a couple days stale, but it's not bad, it's already done. And if you write code for testing, it has to actually be performant, right? Because a lot of the code I used to write as a pen tester was just, it worked, right? I could make it work and it was good enough, but you kind of have to make it better if you're gonna cron job it and rely on it reasonably. And then the idea of smoke test versus regression tests, right? Find those tests that are quick and easy and maybe they're not great security tests, but they give you a good baseline, right? Those ones just run all the time. And then when you really, really need to test something, do those long-running regression tests.
Just a quick question on your threat model.
Yeah.
In Agile, you don't know what the full spectrum is, as you say, you can just break it down sticks, so you're not going to know what the whole threat model is going to look like. How do you deal with that?
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat this since you didn't have a mic, and correct me if I get it wrong. So in Agile, you don't necessarily have the full threat model. How are you going to do that?
Agile, you don't have the full requirements, so how do you do your threat model?
How do you do your threat model? For us, the threat models are data flow diagrams, so at least, even if we don't have the full feature set, we know there's gonna be an API and a work queue and a database and et cetera, so we can get the flow out, even if the flow represents a small portion of the functionality of the end state.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah,
Perfect, and thank you for the question. Okay, I did all those things. So maximize what you've got. Like, this is another place where you can make easy wins. There's everything at Rackspace. I don't want to say there's a lot, but there's a lot of everything. But some of our groups are using Django to do their web application development. Django has a configurable tool, like a true false, I don't remember what the config option is, to turn on anti-CSRF tokens. Like, this is a ridiculously easy way to get rid of CSRF, right? It's a look in the repo. If it doesn't have it on, ask the devs to check in a true, or just do a pull request to make it true, and you fix that problem. So a lot of this, I find places like, I used to be working in a .NET shop as well, and there's tons of options in .NET to do good security. People just don't turn them on. So whatever you have, really learn the framework. If you're lucky, you only have one or two. We have kind of everything at Rackspace. But really, really understand those because you can get some big, easy wins. Tests need to be easily repeatable and easy to understand because we have 12 of us now in the product security group, but we're often shuffling between tests. And if I'm in the middle of testing product A and product B needs a retest, my coworker has to be able to pick up my stuff and go. And then abstract and combinable, right? This is the idea of the Unix pipe. I really love the idea of making lots of little, and I'll talk about this, lots of little tests, and then combining them to get an end result, right? And that way you can mix and match depending on the context. So like SSL is a great example. SSL cipher checking, you need it for websites, you need it for APIs, you need it for a bunch of stuff. Make that its own little test. But I won't do, say, cross-site scripting tests for an API, but I will do SSL for both, right? So make those, combine them all kind of Lego blocks, stick them together, and get what you need to get your job done, hopefully.
Sorry, another question.
Yeah.
Coming back to the story, you're obviously set of acceptance criteria in that story. So in terms of your testing, would you expect to have a full block of testing completed, 100% to accept that story as complete, or would you have a rate, 80%, I'm happy with that?
Okay, so the question was, do you do an entire, does the entire story have to be tested for you to be happy with it, or do you do 80%? I'll be honest with you, a lot of times we do 80%, because it's a time trade-off, right? If I can only get 80% done before it rolls to production, then it rolls, and I look at the 20% after it's in prod, because it's just how it is, yeah. You really have to be pragmatic, particularly with our more aggressive groups. And so that's another place where having these things combinable is really important, because in the context of this particular product, these 3 tests are really need to make sure they're not messed up. You run those early, right? And then maybe those other ones that are interesting but not critical, if those run after they go to prod, that's okay.
Yeah, not exactly the same kind of.
Okay. You feel my pain. Yeah, it's painful. It was a rude awakening for me. Okay. So I and a coworker talked about this idea of test-driven, instead of test-driven development, test-driven security, right? Where you have DevOps and CI and CD, your testing has to be nimble, oh my God, I'm gonna say the A word, agile, right? So in TDD, the overall concept is your code works when the tests pass. For test-driven security, for me, you have a baseline of security when your app passed the tests. And baseline is a key concept, because there's a lot of security purists who will say, oh, well, that test only tests 50% of the possible SQL injections. It's complete and utter trash. I'm like, well, I tested the most common half, and I'll test the other half right after it goes to prod, and I'd rather have half of it tested than none of it tested, right? So I have gotten very pragmatic in my security thinking, quite honestly, because if I didn't, I just wouldn't get anywhere. Oh, yes, it's the time to mourn, right? So in my mind, at least at Rackspace, traditional application security is dead and buried. Like I did used to work at a traditional waterfall shop, and I was hand in hand with, we had an IV&V was what we called our QA shop. And we had a 2-week window where we did testing, and I tested at the same time the QA people did, and it was, yay, wonderful roses. Well, that's dead, for me particularly. It's gone, right? And I would say if you're in this place, I went through the 5 stages of grief. Right? I had denial, right? I like this agile, I never said this really, but I know a lot of security people like, this agile thing is a fad, it's just goofy. I used to joke that at one place that I worked, we had sticky notes all over the walls. I said, like, one really aggressive cleaning lady and her development process is derailed, right? And I had another coworker who was really quite mean who would move them and then walk on. I thought, ooh. Anyway. So that's the stage of denial. Get over it. I'm sorry, Agile's here. I don't think it's going away. So anger, right? There's no way I can test it in that time frame. Like, and if I see another freaking sticky note, I'm gonna go nuts, right? Get over it. Like, it's time to not be angry. Bargaining. Well, I can test 2 of it in 2 days, but I'm not really sure. And you kind of are trying to convince management to give me a little more time, please, right? And then depression. Like, after that launch, I'm gonna go update LinkedIn. Right? And then from aliens, right? Game over, dude, game over, right? Thank you, aliens. And then acceptance, right? Now you start actually talking with the developers, and you say, you know what? I need you to work in a story to get this regression on this login thing. It's not terrible, but let's get it in the next sprint, right? Or like, hey, I looked at your deployment recipe and I found some things that you were missing. You really should say, put root no login for SSH. Here's a pull request. Just add that into your Puppet or Chef. We're done, right? And that's kind of where you need to get. So I'm going to fly through these or hopefully we can fly through these 5 stages of grief by talking about 3 different things. This is sort of how I broke it up for product security at Rackspace, looking at it from an infrastructure perspective, an apps and API perspective, and then the code. So let's talk about infrastructure. So I don't know where you are in your infrastructure automation maturity model, but at Rackspace we have Chef, Puppet, Salt, and Ansible, depending on the team, which makes life interesting because I sort of have to be an expert. No, I'm not an expert, but I know a lot of them, right? But at first you're like, oh, God, I gotta know all this junk. But then I thought about it, and if I can bless how they deploy a node for an API and understand that that's hardened, that means that every node that we deploy is hardened. So this is actually a huge win. And it felt kind of weird at first, but it actually is fantastic. And I'm gonna go really quick over this, but for those people who don't know the Chef's Puppet, all the infrastructure automation stuff, they have this idea of a sysadmin who has some sort of either hosted server or private repo that has recipes or salt stacks or what have you that know how to go down and deploy nodes, right? And there are cookbooks or stacks or playbooks or whatever that go through and talk about, so I want you to set up an Ubuntu system, and if you do, I want you to do install AutoConf, Flex, and Bison, right? Whatever, right? So they're just recipes that say do these things on a machine. I'm sorry? Honestly, at Rackspace, it depends on the team. Some of them, there's a really blurry line between devs and ops, and others, it's much more distinct. So it depends. Yeah. Generally, it has been the ops people. The nice thing here is, right, you can grab a lot of these things and you get decent baselines and kind of modify them to fit your work, so at least you can get some stuff out the door quickly. But to me, this is the place where I spend a lot of security cycles. Because like I said, if I can get this recipe that not only launches an API node, but an API node that is hardened and meets our requirements for a hardened node, I'm kind of done. Because I know every time they press go on this, right, it's going to go out consistently, right? And then if you want to have good karma points, try to get those hardening things merged upstream, because a lot of the recipes you pull will make, I don't know, Nginx run on a server, but probably not how you want it to run as a security person, right? And then grouping and tagging. So almost all of these have some sort of ideas of putting a tag or a label or some kind of categorization on the servers you're launching, right? So here's a DB server, and DB servers get MySQL, and there's a web server, and web servers get Apache, and there's a cache, and caches get Mcache, right? So you tie these recipes into tags or some such thing, and maybe for all of them you have a monitoring thing, and every box gets monitoring, right? So there's this mix and match sort of category idea. Oh, now the interesting thing you can do is sort of map security tags to requirements, right? If you have a requirement to have your logs pushed off to a centralized logging server, well, that's like a recipe you write. And then you just mandate that that's part of your standard push, right? Good way to get some quick traction. And then the other thing that we've done somewhat at Rackspace, not entirely as much as I'd like, it's not done yet, although nothing's ever really done, is for each group and tag, we had this idea of, if you think about deploying infrastructure, you have the idea of an architect, right? Or conceptually, this is the model we talked about. An architect, the person who designs the building, right? This is what the building looks like. And then you have the sort of construction company, the builder, right? And they go out and they build the building, right? So that's the guy who pushes go on the recipe. And we have this idea of an inspector, right? The guy who comes in and with the checkboard and ticks all the boxes. Did you have, is the pipe, this far, is it grounded, yada, yada. So we wrote an inspector that we can hook into the post-deploy system and do a review to make sure that that thing deployed matches what we expected. So we have a little inspector, in essence, with a clipboard walking around ticking the boxes. And I'll talk about how we did this at Rackspace particularly a little bit further down the line. And then this is where we're checking for code compliance, not perfection, right? This is another place where you're like, where are the bare minimums? Because it gets very tricky to test certain aspects of deployment, but there are some that are just really easy, right? Is like directory indexing not turned on in Apache. That's really easy to check, right? So check that, right? And you can, for me, I'm worried about security, quite honestly, but you can also have multiple facets to this inspector, right? What about scalability, right? What about compliance? If this is a PCI environment, well, then I got to do maybe some more things than I do in a normal environment, or less, or who knows, right? Okay. Agent, yes. One mole to rule them all. So at Rackspace, I would joke that I would come home from work and clean out my pockets and I'd find a server, right? Because we have like infrastructure and cloud and virtual all over the place, right? There's just like popping a server at Rackspace is a non-event. And so in this environment, we would actually have two dev or pre-prod production environments would come up, would be used for a deploy, and then would just get destroyed, right? They just come up, you test them, and they go. So in that environment, you can't, unfortunately, a lot of the security tools have this idea of a mothership that you install and it sits there forever and talks. Well, that doesn't work when your environments come up and down like the wind, right? Because otherwise you're continually installing the mothership in the new environment, which is just a pain. So we're starting to use agents that are dropped on systems that can report back to a mothership that doesn't ever leave. But then those environments can come up and down. As long as that agent is part of a standard build, I'll get a mole, right? A secret agent in on the box that can then give me visibility in what's going on. And if they destroy that system because they're done with their testing or their pre-prod or what have you, it doesn't matter because their next one they build will also have that agent. Reports to the mothership, I'm gonna settle that. Oh, one other key facet, if you wanna make your sysadmins or ops people happy, is make sure that agent is read-only, right? And make sure that you can convince the sysops that it's read-only, because they don't like the fact that you're playing with their boxin. You look like you have a question, ask it.
Oh, right, okay. The safety testing is going to be on your pre-prod environment.
Right?
It's going to be part of your chef script for deployment.
Yep.
So that means you won't be able to use your set. Would you put up agents into your production environment as well? Or would you'd have to modify your chef script in order to take the agent out?
Okay, so the question, just so we have it recorded, was these agents, do you put them just in pre-prod or do you also roll them into production? And right now at Rackspace, I'm gonna do the lawyer answer, it depends. For some groups, we are rolling it all the way to production. Other groups, we haven't gotten there yet. We wanna get to the point though that this is sort of just part of the standard. Because like when we had the Jenkins vulnerability that came out that was really ugly, I had wished I had had this, right? Because if I had an agent on all the boxes, I could just write a little rule that says, tell me if there's Jenkins running. They could all narc out the boxes that had Jenkins. You gather those IPs, find out who owns them, and go knock on heads, right? Yeah, it really makes life much better. Well, I'll talk about that later. There's a point I'll make later. But yeah, no, great question. And then ideally, right, add a quick and dirty dashboard to show these things, right? Like for the Jenkins thing, if we'd had it, we could have turned everybody that had Jenkins red, and then as Jenkins got updated, turn them green. And I could get a quick visual representation of like, wow, we got lots of red, we got work to do. Or there's one or two, let's go find those guys and figure out what's going on, right? Oh, you can roll your own. There's Mozilla MIG, which is actually more forensically based, but you could easily, I'm looking at tweaking that maybe to not do forensics. That's a Mozilla security project, open source written in Go. Interesting agent. Their idea is to use the agent to find signs of compromise. So you can give it a hash of a problematic binary and then say, does it exist on the system? And so it's a sort of a way to forensically look out, but I want to change it to NARC, quite honestly. Cloud Passage is another vendor that if you want to buy it, they have a nice agent-based system to do these kind of things. Yeah, this is the next slide. You guessed my next slide. So if you do this really right, you're almost turning vulnerability scanning on its head, right? Because it used to be you deploy your stuff, I run Nessus, I give you a report, this is what's wrong, right? One of the things we've done is, and I did this actually in a previous job as well, is I just subscribe to all of the things that we used, and that at the previous job, that list was at least fairly finite, right? For all of the things that I used, I subscribed to the announce or the security or the, right, for that list. I got a Gmail account, and then I wrote some interesting filters, so if keywords showed up in them, it forwarded it to me, right? So I made my own sort of baling wire and duct tape system to give me alerts when there were vulnerabilities in products I cared about, right? And this is very useful because you can sort of turn the scanning on the head. Now you're not going, hey, by the way, I just did a scan and your thing's out of date. You can say, today, I don't know, Tomcat issued a patch, and go check your Tomcat because I see from my agent that it's out, right? And I'm not having to do a scan to find that. I'm being told that, which is huge. The other thing is We kind of cheat, quite honestly, in our threat models because we do data flow diagrams, a traditional Microsoft thing. But then I got the ops and the architects and the devs in the room. I pummel them with questions. What framework are you using? What language? What server? Just get all that metadata you can because you have the guys for an hour or so. Like, why not pull it out? I already talked about rolling your own. Right, I did this at a previous job and it worked actually shockingly well, where I just signed up to a whole bunch of vulnerability lists and then did some filtering. Secunia Vim has 40K plus products and they have a thing where you can say, I use this and send me an email and yada yada if you want to pay for a commercial thing. And I just love the fact that it reverses that scanning thing. Right, you're proactively helping the teams. Like you don't have to have the fire drill because I finally got a chance to scan your infrastructure and oh God, this really critical thing is there. It's proactive. We can have a nice, calm conversation over, I'm in England, so over tea, right? And talk about it, right? It's much better than the mad panic. Okay, let's talk about apps and APIs after I take a drink. Okay. So, PDFs are great, but bugs are better, right? So, I don't write reports anymore, which as a former pen tester is frickin' beautiful. And anybody who's pen testing here knows, like getting rid of doing reporting is the Valhalla of pen testing. Instead, I just do bugs now, and they go straight into the bug tracking systems over dev teams. And I'm in a backlog or an issue tracker depending on how the team wants to do things, right? So I don't do the big reports. Occasionally I do for political reasons, but those are the exception, not the rule. This is nice because then it's just a normal workflow for a developer, right? It's just another bug. You can go talk to the Scrum Master and say, let me get, what sprint can we work this into? It's not a, here's this 500 pages of PDF, ugh. Like go make sense of it and come back to me, right? Ideally, you want to have a security category in whatever bug tracking something you have so that you can differentiate between functional and security bugs, and also you can run numbers about what your program is doing. And the bonus points if your tracker has an API, because ours does, and we've automated this. So I just push bug and it whoop into a backlog, which is beautiful. I said it's part of the normal workload. One thing to watch out for is, for the more reticent teams, they might say, oh yes, we've got that in our backlog. And by the way, we haven't looked at our backlog in 8 months. Right, so you do have to sort of keep them honest. A lot of times I've had good luck sort of talking Scrum Masters into doing occasional security sprint. You know, hey, you kind of got a lot of security bugs in here. Why don't we take a 2-week window and just knock all these out and I'll stop bugging you and life will be good for you, right? And a lot of this is learning how the team treats issues because we have lots of diverse teams and for us at Rackspace, it's all over the place. So you kind of have to know how to speak their language. Regrettably at this exact same time, Dan Cornell is talking about ThreadFix, which is a nice way to get metrics out of your security bug tracking, as well as pumping them into issue trackers. So ThreadFix has this idea of pulling in vulnerabilities from multiple sources, sort of normalizing them, and then wiring them into bug trackers. And so what we did at first is we would just put them directly into the bug trackers, but then Scrum Masters and stuff would move them around, and we'd have to go, oh, it wasn't the backlog, now it's in an issue, now it's in a sprint, like, where is it? So we made our own. This becomes a security sort of source of truth that integrates with the bug tracking system. And the nice thing with ThreadFix is it'll let you know that it got closed in the bug tracking system. So I can look in ThreadFix and say, that thing I reported last week just got closed. Let me go talk to them and make sure it's cool, then we can retest. Whoops. I found the screen. Ah, yes, nag, nag, nag. So the other thing we did is for each, we came up with a 5-tier risk or severity classification system, right? Standard thing, no big deal there. But the one thing we did is we put an SLA to each severity, and then for the SLA, it's not getting it fixed, it's getting a remediation plan in place, right? Which gives some flexibility, right? Maybe this is a really horrible issue, but because it's a design fault, you can't do it in 7 days. I mean, just physically impossible, right? So, okay, let's get a plan within 24 hours to know that the team's gonna start working on this and we're gonna do this mitigation, et cetera, et cetera. So our SLAs aren't based on being fixed, but having a remediation plan in place. Once we have that in place, now I have something I can sort of put a line in the sand and wait till we get there and then go talk to the team, right? We're a week out, how are we doing? That kind of a thing. Yeah, remediation fixed, age. And then what we've also done for less aggressive teams is in our source of truth, we start aging these, right? We don't have a fix yet, and we should. So let's do a, hey, you're a week out. Just send a little gentle reminder to the project manager. And then maybe a day or two out, we send it to the project manager and the director. And we just start walking up the org chart. And it's highly effective the higher you go, right? I'd like to work with carrots and not sticks, but sometimes you have to have sticks. Once again, if you can do some kind of dashboard for your metrics, this is great, right? Because then the manager can go, why does this one product have the big thing in the chart and not everyone else has little things? And for the neg tool particularly, when you start walking up the org tree, I would want some executive cover fire because some directors get really grumpy if you start sort of showing them out, right? So make sure the directors are happy with you nagging people.
You still get the issue with Howard's books that you think, actually, this is really trivial, we'll get it at some point, we'll get it at some point, we'll get it at, and people say, look, this is only never going to happen because the way you've tested this is why we found it.
Yeah, that's unfortunately part of life. The question was, do you have the thing where people say, yeah, this is not that big to fix, but we're not going to, we're not getting to it, we're not getting to it. That's kind of the death by backlog thing I alluded to. And yeah, that's part of the, sometimes that's, solved at layer 8 where you go just have some nice conversations with people and twist some arms. And sometimes you can just go down to the devs and go, look, man, I'm bugging you, you're sick of me. Like 3 lines, you check it in, we do a pull request, we're done. Right, let's just, and I've like stealthed into sprints fixes because it's like, I'm gonna keep talking to you. So you could like get rid of me for a long time if you just do 3 lines of code, right, done. Okay, so reports equals findings plus automation. So what we've done is actually standardized on ASCII doc, but pick what you want. Pick a markup language, right? Because if you're a tester, you probably are fine using VI or Vim or a text editor, Sublime, or whatever, right? You can just quickly knock these things out in text. A simple markup. And then you can use something like pandoc or ASCII doc as a built-in to convert those to HTML if you need a web report, or PDF if you need a handoff of PDF, or whatever you want. So when I write a finding, we actually write the findings, well, initially, we've improved on that, but initially we wrote the findings in a markup, and then multiple people on the team could all write findings, and the report was glue all the findings together and ship it off to the person. If they wanted it as a HTML, great. If they wanted it as PDF, great. If you wanted it as a doc, great. We can gen all those.
I think that's tagged against the story. Is that tagged against the story or the acceptance criteria of the story?
Depends. Yeah, the question was, is it tagged to a story? And it depends, quite honestly, because somebody asked me what languages do you have at Rackspace? And I said, can I tell you what we don't have because it's shorter? So yeah, the teams are very diverse. Oh, but the nice thing is, right, your testers are writing the least as possible, right? I have boilerplate, and you can take, if you have the stuff in easy to parse format, you can take out and sum up numbers for them, like why is somebody counting the number of highs? Like that's something a computer program can do, right? The other thing we did is started reusing these templates, right? Because your first cross-site scripting finding, where you say reflective cross-site scripting is blah, 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 is like the 400th one, that reflective cross-site scripting is blah, 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 doesn't change. Like, why am I writing that more than once ever in my life? So we've templated that, and every time we have a new finding, we can actually make that a template, and then the next time it comes around, I don't have to type it again. Oh, and this is, yeah, we started with Dratis, which was good, except for it didn't enforce correct syntax, so you try to glue these things together and the parser would break. We've now written a web app where they just enter them in as individual form feeds, and then they're atomic. And I can mix and match however I need.
When you find if you template these responses, you'll find out you've actually got 1,000 templates or...
Yeah, it is a problem. I mean, you sort of have this growth of, the question was, do you find that you have a whole bazillion templates? Yes. One thing we did with ours is that one of our tester guys will go find something and say, you can create a finding that doesn't become automatically a template. But if you think it's useful, again, you can make it a template. Those go into sort of this pending or purgatory of templates, and then myself or a couple other senior people will go in and look at them, make sure the spelling's correct and the wording's good, and then we'll bless those. So we sort of have a lot of times the purgatory gets full, but what you actually see for day-to-day use is small. I had the same thing at a different company when I was pen testing. We had like, which of the 4,000 templates do you want? And like 17 of them are cross-site scripting. Okay, cool, settle that stuff. Oh yes, leveraging existing consistencies, yes. So what does this mean? This is best done by example. So I mentioned earlier that OpenStack has an allergy to waddles, right? We do no waddles. So if I'm testing, and guess what? Rackspace has lots and lots of OpenStack and lots of RESTful APIs, which is a problem because every time I have to test them, I have to read the docs and at least get code or something that knows how to talk to it before I can even start testing. Well, at least when you're dynamically testing. So one of my coworkers, and props to him, realized that the docs that we produce at docs.rackspace.com are computer generated, which means they are consistent, which means they're rather parsable. So he wrote a little bit of code that goes to the docs, pulls that down, parses it, and makes stub code in Python for all of the method calls. So in essence, we made the docs into quasi-waddles. And now I can say, I'm testing Swift, point it at the Swift docs, run the tool. The code doesn't work, but it writes, 40, 50% of it for me, and I just have to fill in some bits, and I have working code. Really sped us up like crazy. I talked about this already. We automated finding and bug submission. Initially, at the first gen of this, it was literally just, I had a bit of code that I could take a finding and push it into a tracker, and then we actually started using ThreadFix, right? And now that's even more automated. Automatic PDF generation, because we're using ASCII doc, and it has a thing, it's ASCII doc-f PDF, wham. I talked about this. Oh, the other one was, that was an interesting one too. But there's another great one that one of the apps, one of our web apps had a bunch of reflective cross-site scripting, right? What do? Well, 15 minutes, oh my, I'm gonna go fast. What do? You go fast. He actually just made a static web page with clickable links that exercise the cross-site scripting and hand it off to the dev team. Like, until these things don't have alerts, don't come back to me. And we write a lot of scripting automation too. Like I found an issue with an API and I wrote a little bit of Ruby, handed it off to the dev teams and said, run this, so that at least when they come back, I have a fairly good assurance that it's fixed. Whew. Securing code. Oh, yes. Yes, one big thing for my team particularly, findings have to be detailed enough that if I read your findings 6 months from now, I can understand what happened, right? Because if nothing else, the developer is going to come back to me and say, I don't even know what this means. And if I can understand your finding, we're all kind of doomed. And I don't have to retest it. A lot of times we can actually get QE to do this retesting for us, depending on the nature of the vulnerability. If it's easy to produce in the tools that they use. And this can allow developers to fix the issues. Oh yeah, and I've already talked about these. Actually, there's a reflective cross-site scripting one. And script abuse via an API was the thing I mentioned, the Ruby script, right? Where I just automated that little bit of, it was a particular post that the API didn't like. I just wrote a little bit of Ruby to send the post, right? And then Gauntlet is an interesting tool to do sort of test-driven security, repeatable, small testing, which I quite like. And then once these findings started flowing, I was actually getting requests, can we do developer training? Like, well, yes, we can. I want to make my job harder. Well, I don't, but I do. Oh, and then cherry pick what you look at. I talked about threat models earlier, right? Focus on those weak and suspicious areas. Connections to external systems, any kind of transformation, if I'm going from JSON to XML or weird parsing, right? Those are usually areas that get tripped up, right? Then you can, in your automation, do commit hooks for those areas of the code. And in OpenStack, they have this idea of +2 to accept a commit. We'll make it a +3 for those particular bodies of code, right? Because now I want 3 eyes looking on it. And by the way, if I have a commit hook, I can also be alerted and decide if I need to look at that, right? Which is a huge thing. Just using, we have an internal GitHub, enterprise GitHub account. Just the search inside of that has been fantastically useful. And then we've just started to, and this is a key thing, develop a list of problematic things, right? And it just is designed to grow organically as we find these things, right? I will never have the list, but I have an ever-growing list.
Don't you have any conflict of interest on the +2 or +3 inspection part continuous integration? Because you're then bringing in a more manual step to say, actually, I've got to review that code before I can commit it to my release branch.
Yeah, so is there fighting about the +3 versus +2? Yes, but luckily for our developers that do OpenStack, they're sort of used to that, so that wasn't much of a hard sell.
Oh, okay.
Because that just, in OpenStack proper, if you commit, you must get a +2. So, internally making it a +3 wasn't a hard sell. I got lucky in that regard. No false positives, right? So one false positive is worth probably 100, if not 1,000 valid bugs. Like never, 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 this is my beat on my team, give a false positive to a team because cred points are really hard to get as a security person. You're already kind of hated, quite honestly. So if you give them a reason to hate you, guess what they will, right? And quite honestly, if you're not verifying false positives, what better are you than a monkey that clicks next 5 times on Nessus, right? This is just your value add is the fact that I can only give you actionable items as a security professional, right? And the differential analysis, and I sort of talked about this on the code thing. Threat model plus scary parts plus code diffs, right? Let me focus on the areas that are really, really scary. And there's some stuff that I'm just never gonna look at. You change the CSS of a website, I don't care, right? You change the login, I do care.
Is this where you'd actually be spiked in sprints for the scary parts? So it may be a matter of an idea about spiking there.
Can you say that again? I didn't catch it.
So your scary parts, you'd actually start looking at spiking activity rather than just go straight into the work or,
Yeah, a lot of times what we've done is just do commit hooks. And so I can quickly sort of scan and see if this is even worth my time, right? I can take a 2-minute break and go, ooh, I need to actually cut some time up for this, or no. Because more of it's just like I need to be alerted about what I need to know about and be able to filter quickly. And quiet is better than wrong, right? Hire and befriend developers. That's one of our guys have to have some sort of development experience if you want to work in our team. 10 minutes, we'll be okay. Speak their language. A big thing for me is suggest requirements, not implementations. For example, this was at a former position, but the guy who was in charge of compliance would tell the teams, you must install Tripwire for PCI. And I'm like, no, they must install host intrusion detection. Like if it's something else, it doesn't matter, it still meets it. So don't think about a specific implementation, think about a requirement. If nothing else, developers like being creative, and you've given them the opportunity to be creative. If you say, it just has to do this, you figure out how, and I'll evaluate if it's good enough, right? And then we're all fine. Yeah, mitigation suggestions should be generic or in the language it's written in. Like, don't give a Java example to your Python guys unless you want to be snickered at. And then the other thing is, like, fast deploys also mean fast fixes. Some of the groups, when I'm testing them, I will find bugs, and I'm on IRC with them, and I'm like, hey, dude, I just did this, and this happened. And they're like, oh, man, that's bad. And they're like, okay, it's fixed. I didn't even write up a finding yet. Like, well, yeah. So it is kind of good. Yes, sir.
Did you ever think about putting one security guy into each of the agile teams instead of doing this separately, or are you just not enough people?
The question was, do we have one per team? We want to get there, but we don't have enough people. That's really what it boils down to. Yeah, that would be the ideal case, but we just don't have the bodies. Because then I would really, really know the product. Right, and now I have to sort of be schizophrenic and really know Nova while I'm testing it, and then I have to forget that and really know something else. Yes. Yeah, be prepared to really quickly test and re-verify, because if you have these guys that before you can write up the finding, fix it, because I literally have written up findings, put them in the bug tracker, and close them. Because they're just that fast. Okay, in my last few minutes, I'll quickly do what Rackspace is doing. Right, I've already said that we have Chef, Puppet, and Chef, depending on the team. We review the deploy scripts, we validate them with the external vulnerability scanners, and they sort of get blessed, and we watch for commits. We watch for commits, and then if we have to have them make an adjustment, we'll rescan, right? We use Cloud Passage in a lot of our deployments, and we also have a custom mole that we write for certain situations, right? It kind of depends. Cloud Passage does a lot of nice stuff. It's not bad. And it saved me from having to write a lot of code, to be bluntly honest, time-wise. And we've done tons and tons of threat models. And actually, one of my guys, we have 70 some odd threat models of all the interconnected systems, and he actually made this giant map in HTML of all the system names. You can click on them, it takes you to the threat model, and then inside of there, the external threat models are also hyperlinked. So you can actually walk through all of the infrastructure, which has really been super helpful. Product security workflow, we have somebody finds a finding, they document it in our test tracker app, that pushes it into ThreadFix. ThreadFix pushes it into the bug trackers, right? And then we have all of the metrics driven off of ThreadFix. So we've sort of automated that whole workflow. Yes?
When you say team members find an issue, how do you find those issues? So what sorts of tests do you use? Like, is it all like your own scripts that
It would, yeah, like Rackspace, it varies widely. I mean, it can go from just running Nessus and verifying false positives to doing a manual test to you're doing a SAML integration, so you write your own little SAML client and just play with it. So it's kind of the range. Most of it's manual now because we've automated a lot of the automatable things. But it could be that like we use Veracode for static analysis, and we've integrated with their API, and I pull down issues, and they go into the same workflow. So the issue may not even be technically found by us, it may be found by somebody else. Oh, yeah, we've had to re-implement the nag script because we had a minor change to the workflow, and I already mentioned this. We're using ASCII doc as our markup language and then converting that to what we need. Yes, I just said this. We use Veracode, which is nice for us because it's self-service and binary, right? Just upload your binary and go. Unfortunately, they don't do dynamic languages, so there's a lot of stuff that gets missed for us. We have a Jenkins, we have an open source Jenkins plugin that uploads into Veracode, and then we gave that over to Veracode, and they're keeping track of it now. I mean, we did API automation to pull in those findings, and they just become part of our workflow. I've already talked about this. We do detailed finding blocks, and for more interesting issues, or if we've had to script it anyway, we take out that script and hand it to the dev teams. 5 minutes, good. I'm good, I'm good.
Do you upload all code to Veracode, or just like those parts you actually hooked in or like you're tracking?
If we can scan it, we hook it into Veracode. Now, some teams, I have to pester them every quarter to do it. Some teams have Jenkins, right? So there's a range. Yeah. Oh, we hold trainings. We have e-learning modules. We do work with devs daily. A lot of times we are going to the stand-ups, particularly when we're actively testing our new product launch. Those are times that are kind of super critical. And we do have dev days, which is really nice. So Friday afternoon, we all get up from our desks, go hide in a conference room, and we're knocking out automation tools for our team. Because if you don't carve out that time, you will never, ever do it. And so that was a huge win for us. Key takeaways, like automate everything. And if you're not doing a lot of this now, just find paper cuts. And like get rid of the annoying things first, right? Figure out a workflow and standardize on it. That's been huge for us because now we have this sort of standard workflow. I just keep adding in tools. Like we have AppScan, and I figured out how to parse the god-awful AppScan XML and shove it into our workflow, right? So now I can take those findings from AppScan and boop, off it goes. Create systems which can grow organically, right? You will never, ever finish. Ever, 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 ever. But if you make it so that you can keep adding things easily, this thing can grow over time and become even more functional. Well, so maybe the first time I have it, it does 5%. And then a month from now, it does 20%. And then 3 months from now, it does 60%. Well, that's better than never starting or trying to get to 100% before I use it. And I've already talked about reusing finding blocks. You don't have to keep rewriting the same boilerplate junk. And learn to talk dev. That's important, right? Dev or DevOps. Whoever desires constant success must change to his conduct with the times, right? I couldn't believe I could fit a Machiavelli quote into a AppSec talk, but I got it. Yes. I think that's it. Thank you very much. And I made it on time. Look at that. Whew. It was close. I thought I had more slides than I did. Any other questions? Yeah.
So how long did it take you to get to that stage, and did you like make a lot of mistakes along the way?
Yes and yes. So how long did it take to get to that stage, and do we make a lot of mistakes? I've been at Rack since October of 11. I moved over to product security in March of 12, so that long. Right? Yeah, it takes a long time, and we originally, like I said, tried to drop things directly into bug trackers, but then people would move them. And so our sort of pointers into the bug trackers would be broke. And I have to go find them again. So that's why we made our own source of truth. So, oh yeah, you'll learn all kinds of things and bust your knuckles. Absolutely. Other question? Yes?
How much redundancy there is in the system? For example, you were saying after you deploy your public recipe, then you do this expected stage.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're kind of the SD hole with the puppet, was the puppet received correct or not? But like, then you do reasonably redundancy. You verify that the previous stage was done correctly, but then you wind up down this stage to verify that.
Yeah, no, that's true.
I was just curious.
No, that's an interesting gap, and we've struggled with that in all honesty. So if I know that their puppet is good, I can be fairly, confident that the second one will be good, but a lot of times what we'll do is on a quarterly or maybe biannual basis, just do a rescan of everything of that product. from a Nessus so that you can find drifts. The other thing that we really like is hooking the code repositories of where the chef lives. So if they make a change, I can go, oh, this is now drifted. I need to go look at it again. Because a lot of it is just getting alerts and then getting, making like, okay, now I know there's an issue. Do I need to care about it? And you can quickly sort of decide. Any other questions? Going once, going twice? Yes?
There's always more questions. In terms of doing regression, do you do regression testing against all this things like your integration? And then what's the impact against the security on that regression testing?
Yeah, I'm not a QA person or a QE person. I was using regression testing, well, let me put it this way. I don't want to speak for our QA, QE group. They're quite mature. And they do regression testing. And that gets really interesting when you do things like launch servers, because like how deep you go. But for me, and in a security perspective, I consider a regression test a long-running test. So to me, it's more of like a very thorough, almost a manual test would be a regression test. Like a manual pen test would be a regression test. Because you can't just fire it off and forget it. Excellent. Well, thank you very much.